Judas in the Canonical Gospels, and a CTSA review of the Canonical Gospels in the Book of Acts reveals how each portrays Judas. They serve both as the foundation of the grim image of Judas that has persisted through the centuries, and as evidence that this image is not depicted as severely in the texts themselves, as we often assume. Certainly, the writings do not defend Judas, nor do they elevate him to the role of a hero, as the Gospel of Judas seems to attempt. Modern interpretations stress that, apart from Luke 6:16, Judas is never explicitly described as betraying Jesus in the sense of being a traitor. Instead, he is portrayed as fulfilling a role foretold in the Hebrew Scriptures, anticipated by Jesus, and even commanded by him. Yet, the canonical accounts also declare a curse upon Judas for his act, and describe his overwhelming remorse, leading to suicide. Such an end is hardly what one would expect of someone simply fulfilling prophecy or obeying Jesus. To depict Judas as praiseworthy rather than guilty, therefore, requires a radical rethinking of values, the kind of reversal promised in the Gospel of Judas. To the historical Judas Chi name, Judas Iscariot, Iser-Ait. Judas is the Greek form of the Hebrew name, Judah, which means praised. Judah was an extremely common name in Jewish culture, so much so that Judaism itself derives its name from Judah. In fact, the term Jew ultimately comes from Judah. Paul, for instance, notes that he was raised in Judaism, though he belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. Judah was the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, and also the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. When the Israelites entered the Promised Land, the tribe of Judah was allotted the southern region. After Solomon's reign, the kingdom David had established split into two, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. The northern kingdom was eventually conquered by the Assyrians and vanished from historical records. After the Babylonian exile, Judah was resettled by those returning from captivity. Under the Roman Emperor Augustus, the region was called Judea, and its people became known as Judah. Today, the modern state of Israel uses Judea to refer to its southern part, although international references, including the United Nations and U.S. sources, often describe much of it as part of the occupied West Bank. Given that Judas is simply the Greek form of Judah, it was a widely used Jewish name. The Maccabean revolt against the Syrian forces was led by Judas Maccabee, and the name remained especially common among the Maccabees. The Jewish historian Josephus notes that the Zealots, also called Sicarii, frequently gave their leaders the name Judas. Within the New Testament itself, 6 individuals named Judas are mentioned. Actually, Jesus had a brother named Judas. This fact has been somewhat obscured because the translators of the King James Bible aim to keep the 2 individuals named Judas distinct. Consequently, the epistle attributed to Jesus' brother is titled Jude in the King James Bible. It begins, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James. James, of course, is another brother of Jesus, as indicated in Matthew 13:55. Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? Moreover, in Luke's list of the 12 apostles, 2 are named Judas, and Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. After the crucifixion, when Luke lists only 11 apostles, only one Judas remains, Acts 1:13, and Judas, the son of James. Given the number of individuals named Judas, especially the 2 in Luke's list of the 12, not to mention Jesus' brother, it was clearly necessary to distinguish them. In the various lists of the apostles, most are identified by a single name, but when more than one shares the same name, additional descriptors are added to differentiate them, such as Simon Peter versus Simon the Cananean, or James, brother of Andrew, versus James, son of Alphaeus. The same method applies to Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot. So what does Iscariot mean? Several theories exist, but none can be considered definitive. One possibility is that it signifies man from Koreath, assuming Koreath is the name of a town in southern Judea, mentioned in Joshua 15:25. Yet, the text could simply mean town, as suggested by the New Revised Standard Version translation, Kerioth Hezron, that is, Hazor. Another note in the NRSV regarding Judas son of Simon Iscariot, John 6-71, offers an alternative. Judas son of Simon from Kerioth, a place called Tel Kerioth exists on modern maps in the Negev, and there is also an Askeroth, or Asker near Shechem. Another proposal is that it simply refers to someone from the city, meaning Jerusalem, as suggested by later Jewish sources. Any of these interpretations would make Judas the only apostle from Judea, helping explain why he was familiar to the Jerusalem authorities. Alternatively, Iscariot might refer to one of the Sicarii, the term Josephus used for the zealots of his time. Other explanations for Iscariot also exist. In short, the origin of the term remains so uncertain that it cannot provide definitive information, except that it served to distinguish this Judas both from the other Judas among the 12, and from Jesus' brother Judas. The Gospel of John, additionally, provides the name of Judas's father. At the time, as today, it was common to use a father's name or, sometimes, an ancestor's name as a person's second name. For example, my own name includes two such patronymics. In English, the suffix son is the usual way to form a patronymic, as in the Scottish use of Robin derived from Robert. Even my middle name, McConkey, uses the Gaelic patronymic MC or Mac. In Greek, the patronymic is expressed in the genitive case, meaning X, the son of Y. Accordingly, the Gospel of John refers to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, John 6-71, 13-2, 26. Since nothing else is known about this Simon, however, this detail does not provide further insight. Judas in the inner circle there has long been debate over whether Judas truly belonged to the 12. Many have found it difficult to imagine that Jesus would allow such a person into his closest circle. Yet the Gospel of John, which is particularly critical of Judas, emphasizes that Jesus deliberately chose him, John 6-70. Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil." He was speaking of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. John's insistence that Jesus intentionally selected Judas assumes that Judas was already seen as a notorious scoundrel, a presumption that is precisely what merits scrutiny in the 2nd century. The Jewish critic Celsus used Judas's betrayal to challenge Jesus' authority. How could we have accepted as God one who, as was reported, did not carry out any of the works he announced? And when we had evidence against him, and denounced him, and wanted to punish him, he hid himself, and tried to escape. Who was captured in a disgraceful manner, and even was betrayed by one whom he called his disciple. Surely if he was God, he would not have needed to flee, or been taken away bound, and least of all to be left in the lurch and deserted by his companions, who shared everything with him personally, considered him their teacher. Despite this, Judas appears in every list of the 12 in the Gospels: Matt 10-4, Mark 3:19, Luke 6:16, confirming his official status within the group. The real question of his inclusion concerns less about Judas himself, and more about whether Jesus deliberately formed an inner circle of exactly 12 disciples. The use of 12 likely reflects the 12 tribes of Israel. Traces of this idea appear at the end of the sayings Gospel Q. Kilas 10:28. Delano 30. You who have followed me will sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Matthew later adapts this passage to suggest that since each disciple would judge a tribe, there would naturally be 12 thrones. Matt 20:28. You who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Here, the concept of judging the 12 tribes of Israel clearly came before the notion of 12 thrones, which in turn gave rise to the idea of 12 members in the inner circle. It seems, then, that the number 12 was determined not by counting those in the inner circle, but by the tribes themselves. For instance, Paul can refer simply to the 12, even in situations where no more than 11 disciples were present. In his account of the resurrection appearances, he writes 1 Cor. 15:5. He appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. At that point, Judas was no longer part of the 12. Jesus would have appeared to only 11. Paul's emphasis, however, is on the inner circle of disciples, traditionally called the 12. In fact, some of those listed as the 12 appear only by name, without participating in specific narratives. The names most commonly associated with the inner circle in stories are Peter, James, and John, a Jewish Christian gospel that was not included in the New Testament. The Gospel of the Ebionites mentions only 9 disciples, including Judas, yet, when describing the calling of Matthew, it still refers to 12 apostles as a witness to Israel, again linking the number to the 12 tribes, regardless of whether the 12 actually numbered 12 during Jesus' public ministry. It is evident that Judas was part of this inner circle. His name would hardly have been added later, after his betrayal and subsequent suicide. But what can we really know about him? What did Judas actually do? The Gospel of John portrays Judas as the treasurer of Jesus' movement, using this role to cast him in a negative light in the story of Mary and Martha, John 12:4-6. But Judas, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor?" He did not say this out of concern for the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal from it. This narrative is revisited at the Last Supper, John 13:27-29. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do." No one at the table understood why he said this. Some thought, since Judas had the common purse, that Jesus was instructing him to buy supplies for the festival or to give something to the poor. Since John is the only gospel that mentions Judas having the common purse and does so mainly to discredit him, it is difficult to determine whether this detail reflects historical reality. It is more likely a Johannine creation than a factual account. Mark, on the other hand, explains that the Jewish authorities sought a private way to arrest Jesus, fearing the crowds during the festival. Mark 14:1-2. Jesus later references this in the Garden of Gethsemane, Mark 14:49. "Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but let the scripture be fulfilled." Of course, the historical Jesus would not have known the authorities' warning in advance, Mark 14:2, not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people. Which scripture would Jesus have had in mind? Could he really have known the Hebrew scriptures as thoroughly as modern scholars suggest? Probably not. Mark also presents Jesus predicting at the Last Supper that Judas would betray him. Mark 14:18-21. When they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. For the Son of Man goes, as it is written of him, but woe to the one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Here, Jesus is depicted as fulfilling a prophecy from the Old Testament. Ps. 41:9. "Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate of my bread, has lifted the heel against me." This presents a striking paradox. The Hebrew scriptures foretell Judas's actions, and Jesus is aware of this prophecy, yet he does nothing to stop it, because it aligns with God's will. Yet he still pronounces a woe on the one who carries it out. Would it truly have been better for Judas never to have existed? Perhaps for Judas himself, but certainly not for fulfilling Jesus' divinely ordained destiny. Matthew underscores this role of Judas as well. Matt 26-25. Judas, who betrayed him, asked, "Is it I, Rabbi?" He replied, "You have said so." The Gospel of John provides a far more detailed account of the scene. John 13:22, 25-27. 30. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the bread, Satan entered him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do." So, after receiving the bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. But what exactly is so egregious about Judas leaving the upper room to hand Jesus over to the Jewish authorities? In doing so, he was fulfilling Hebrew scripture prophecy and following Jesus' own instruction, "Do quickly what you are going." To do all of this reads more like the work of learned evangelists composing a narrative with the Hebrew scriptures before them in Greek translation, rather than a verbatim account of dialogue in the upper room at the Last Supperan environment, where literacy was far more limited. Did Judas Iscariot betray Jesus? The Gospel of Mark depicts the scene in the Garden of Gethsemane in vivid detail, placing Judas at the center. Mark 14:43-45. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came, accompanied by a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent by the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. The one who handed him over had given them a signal, saying, "The one I shall kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." As soon as he arrived, he went straight to Jesus and said, "Master," and kissed him. They then laid hands on him and arrested him. But what is really happening here with Judas? Several modern works have approached him sympathetically, suggesting that what he is said to have done may not have been as morally wrong as traditionally assumed. For example, Ray Anderson's fictionalized account presents a dialogue in which Jesus forgives Judas, aptly titled The Gospel According to Judas. Hans Joseph Klock, a German scholar recently affiliated with the University of Chicago Divinity School, offers a measured assessment of Judas as a disciple of the Lord, though his work is available only in German. William Klassen, in Judas, Betrayer or Friend of Jesus, argues that Judas was more a friend than a betrayer. Kim Paffenrath, who focuses on religion and film, presents a partly fictional but sympathetic portrayal in Judas, Images of the Lost. Disciple Klassen's central thesis is that Judas did not betray Jesus in the sense of treachery, but rather handed him over to the Jewish authorities for evaluation of his claims illegitimate, an understandable act within the context of first-century Judaism. According to Klassen, it is a mistake to think of Judas as a traitor in the way the English word betray implies. He notes, not one ancient classical Greek text carries the connotation of treachery. Any lexicon suggesting otherwise is theologizing rather than showing the actual meaning of Greek words in their usage. Thus, the Greek term used in the Gospels, paradidomi, translated as betray, does not inherently carry the strongly negative sense of betrayal that we associate with the English word dot in the standard Greek-English dictionary of the New Testament. Used by scholars, the primary meaning of the relevant verb is given neutrally as hand over, turn over, give up a person. However, it can also carry a distinctly positive sense, such as give over, commend, commit, for example when commending someone to the grace of God, Acts 14-26, 1540. The verb frequently means hand down, pass on, transmit, relate, or teach oral or written tradition. It is most familiar in the context of the Lord's Supper. For I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you. Las 11:23. And in Paul's introduction to a list of resurrection appearances, for I handed on to you, as of first importance, what I in turn had received. 1 Corinthians 3. This dual meaning of the verb explains why the corresponding noun can refer both to a handing over in the sense of an arrest and to a handing down in the sense of transmitting tradition. Clearly, Judas did hand over Jesus. The etymology of the Greek term is neutral, simply give over, and this is the sense I adopt here. The crucial question, however, is what that act of giving over actually involved. Throughout the New Testament, the literal term traitor is applied to Judas Iscariot only once. In Luke's account listing him last among the 12, Luke says it says, Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Does this represent an error on Luke's part? Judas Iscariot gave Jesus over to the Jewish AOTIH. Much effort has gone into theological debates over what exactly Judas betrayed about Jesus, such as revealing that he was the Messiah. Yet the record is clear. Judas did not disclose anything about Jesus' identity, teachings, or actions. He simply revealed Jesus' location. Mark makes this explicit, Mark 14:1-2. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The chief priests and scribes were looking for a way to arrest him secretly and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be a riot among the people. This connects back to an earlier episode at the cleansing of the temple. Mark 11:18-19. When the chief priests and scribes heard this, they looked for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, as the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples left the city. William Klassen emphasizes that Judas' act of handing Jesus over to the proper Jewish authorities need not be seen as hostile betrayal, but rather as a legitimate procedure within the Jewish context of the time. He concludes, what precisely was Judas's contribution? I suggest that it was quite modest. In conversations with Jesus, he often heard criticism of the temple hierarchy. When Judas reminded Jesus that his usual advice was to rebuke the sinner directly, Jesus may have noted that no opportunity had yet arisen to confront the high priest. Perhaps Judas then offered to arrange such a meeting, hoping that the process of correction would succeed. At the same time, he may have questioned Jesus' own commitment to his mission. This could have led to a plan in which Judas arranged a meeting between Jesus and the high priests, each party approaching it on their own terms and with their own expectations. This role in the handing over later became framed as something far more sinister, especially after Judas' suicide. Whether readers accept this interpretation of the earliest tradition, it is at least as plausible as the deeply negative view of Judas that persists in the church but rests on weak foundations. Of course, this account involves speculative reconstructions of what may have occurred between Jesus and Judas, and is therefore not a definitive argument. Yet it highlights an alternative to the standard narrative portraying Judas as radically disloyal. It also illustrates how the Gospel of Judas could, without excessive imagination, depict Judas as a heroic figure in the story. The suicide of Judas, while the Gospel of Mark mentions nothing more about Judas's fate beyond Jesus pronouncing a woe on the one who hands him over, Mark 14:21. Matthew provides a more detailed account of Judas' remorse and suicide. Matt 27:3-10. When Judas, the one who handed him over, saw that Jesus was condemned, he regretted his action and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. He said, I have sinned by handing over innocent blood. But they replied, what is that to us? See to it yourself. Throwing the silver into the temple, he departed and went away to hang himself. The chief priests, taking the silver, said, it is not lawful to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money. After consulting, they used it to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That field has therefore been called the field of blood to this day. This fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one valued by the people of Israel, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Rather than this episode being a precise fulfillment of an Old Testament prophecy, it is more likely that the narrative detail arose from the prophecy itself. The Hebrew scriptures were considered a reliable source for events fulfilled by Jesus. For instance, Zechariah 7:. sampai 13 recounts. Then I said to them, "If it seems right to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them." So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. The Lord said to me, "Throw it into the treasury, the lordly price at which I was valued by them." So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them into the treasury in the house of the Lord. Similarly, the detail that those who crucified Jesus divided his clothes among themselves, casting lots to decide what each should take, Mark 15-25, comes from Psalm 22:18. They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. Such elements of the crucifixion story likely do not stem from eyewitness testimony. It is only in modern times that historians have developed methods capable of questioning the factual accuracy of details, drawn solely from Old Testament quotations. Luke also reports that Judas took his own life, offering an account that differs slightly from Matthew's, Acts 1:15-19. In those days, Peter stood up among the believers, about 120 in total, and said, "Friends, the scripture had to be fulfilled, which the Holy Spirit, through David, foretold concerning Judas, who became a guide for those who arrested Jesus, for he was counted among us and shared in this ministry. Now this man acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his intestines spilled out. This became known to all the residents of Jerusalem, so that the field was called in their language Hakeldama, that is, field of blood." These two accounts of Judas' death appear to confirm that he did indeed commit suicide, although the details differ. In Matthew, he hangs himself, while in Acts he falls forward and is fatally ruptured. Both narratives link the suicide to the field of blood purchased with the 30 pieces of silver. In Matthew, the field is bought by the Jewish authorities using the silver Judas returned to them, whereas in Acts, Judas himself acquires the field, which becomes the site of his death. Since the specifics are mutually exclusive, it is unlikely that one account is copying the other. Rather, both traditions seem to stem from a common source, agreeing on the core facts. Judas committed suicide, and the term field of blood is connected to his death. The rehabilitation of Judas Iscariot figures in history carry a reputation as notoriously bad as Judas Iscariot. Simply sneering Judas, or mentioning 30 pieces of silver or Judas' kiss is enough to convey betrayal, even without further explanation. Even those who have never read the Gospels understand the reference. It is akin to calling someone a Benedict Arnold to denote a traitor, without needing to recount the details of his betrayal of the American colonies to the British. Perhaps it is time to reconsider Judas Iscariot's image. The evangelists often portray the 12 as somewhat oblivious to Jesus' mission, yet they have become celebrated figures who lend credibility to the Gospels of Matthew and John. Peter, for instance, once rebuked Jesus when he foretold his passion, yet his reputation has shifted from Satan to the Rock. Jesus' family initially tried to restrain him early in his ministry, but now Mary is venerated as having been assumed into heaven, and believers pray, "Hail, Mary, Mother of God." In short, the questionable characters in the story have been canonized except for Judas. Has his moment for reconsideration not arrived? I have drawn extensively from the thoughtful work of Mennonite theologian William Klassen, who persuasively argues that translations such as betray, betrayal, and traitor misrepresent the meaning of the Greek term. It actually conveys a neutral sense of give over, hand over, or turn in. This neutral interpretation aligns with the narrative itself. Jesus repeatedly informs the 12, in great detail, that he must go to Jerusalem to die, and reproaches Peter for resisting this truth. These events are prophesied in the Hebrew Scriptures, and thus represent God's will, which Jesus must fulfill. Judas fulfills a crucial role in this divine plan, and surely he understands it. He is even mentioned in prophecy, John 13:18. The one who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. PS 4, 1 y 10. He is simply following Jesus' instructions. Do quickly what you are going to do. John 13:27. What is inherently wrong with that? Of course, much of this reflects Markan theology rather than historical fact, which is sometimes overlooked in attempts to rehabilitate Judas. Even Mark, while situating Judas within the plan of salvation, still pronounces woe on him. Mark 14:21. Yet, at the same time, Mark portrays the rest of the 12 as foolish, Peter as Satan, and Jesus' family as awkwardly embarrassed by his radical behavior, though his mother remains with him to the bitter end, and his brother James emerges as a leader in the Jerusalem church. Christianity has since rehabilitated all of these figures, making it somewhat inconsistent to leave Judas Iscariot condemned alone. The case has been made that Judas might have believed that bringing Jesus before the official Jewish authorities was the proper course of action, thinking they would understand his message and validate his ministry. Yet, in Mark's account, Jesus predicts the events of Good Friday in detail, explicitly identifying the chief priests and the scribes as the agents of evil. Judas would have been extraordinarily naive not to realize the consequences of handing Jesus over to them. Interpreting the canonical Gospels as favoring Judas is therefore extremely challenging. Matthew and Luke do not significantly revise Mark's account to absolve him, and the Gospel of John presents him in an even worse light. Asterisk, asterisk, it is true that Matthew and the book of Acts report Judas's remorse returning the 30 pieces of silver to the Jewish authorities, were purchasing a field for his suicide and ultimately taking his own life. While these details might seem to offer some measure of exoneration, they hardly make him a sympathetic figure in the canonical texts. Perhaps the most meaningful way to reconsider Judas is to reflect on Jesus' own teachings about forgiveness. He famously said regarding those who crucified him, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," a sentiment echoed by Stephen, the first Christian martyr, at his stoning. He also promised one of the criminals being crucified alongside him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Asterisk, asterisk, his broader teachings consistently point toward mercy and compassion. In passages preserved in the Q source, often revered as part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus instructs, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father, who lets the sun rise on both the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. If someone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other as well. If a person takes you to court to seize your coat, give them your cloak too. If someone compels you to go 1 mile, go with them too. Give to those who ask, and do not demand back from those who borrow. Treat others as you would like to be treated. If you love only those who love you, what reward will you have? Even tax collectors do that. And if you lend only to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even Gentiles do the same." Viewed in this light, the call to love, forgive, and act generously applies even to those who have wronged us potentially, including Judas. Be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Do not judge, so that you yourselves will not be judged. For the way you judge others, you will be judged in the same way, and the measure you use will be the measure applied to you. Consider this: who among you with 100 sheep, if one goes missing, would not leave the 99 in the open country and go in search of the lost one? And when he finds it, he rejoices more over that one than over the 99 that were never lost. Or take a woman who has 10 coins. If she loses one, would she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin I had lost." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of the angels over one sinner who repents. If your brother sins against you, confront him, and if he repents, forgive him. Even if he sins against you 7 times in one day, You are to forgive him 7 times. So what does this mean for Judas? Should we forgive him and love our enemy? While the arguments that his actions were justified under the circumstances remain unconvincing, we can at least stop using him as a scapegoat. We can seek a fairer, more compassionate understanding of him. 3. The Gnostic Judas. The first notable account of Judas after the New Testament is his vindication. In the mid-2nd century, a Gospel of Judas was composed by a Gnostic sect known as the Cainites. Naturally, it was quickly suppressed, but it appears that this very text has been rediscovered in modern times. What did we know about the Gospel of Judas before this rediscovery from the heresy-hunting church fathers who condemned it, and from our understanding of how texts were composed at that time? The Gospel of Judas is first mentioned by Irenaeus, who wrote Refutation of All Heresies in Lyon, France. Around 180 CE later, it was also documented by another heresy hunter, Epiphanius, Bishop of Salamis on Cyprus, in the 4th century. So our starting point has to be their accounts. Irenaeus's alarmed report reveals a great deal about how the Cainites used scripture and, therefore, how they interpreted Judas's role in the biblical narrative. In fact, he directly mentions the Gospel of Judas in this context. Some claim that Cain derived his existence from the power above, and assert that Esau, Korah, the Sodomites, and all such figures are connected to them. Because of this, they say, they have been opposed by the Creator, yet none have been harmed. For Sophia would often take what belonged to her from them. They claim that Judas the traitor understood these truths thoroughly, and alone, knowing the truth, as no one else did, carried out the mystery of the betrayal. Through him, all things, both earthly and heavenly, were thrown into confusion. They created a work to this effect, which they call the Gospel of Judas. Esau, Korah, and the Sodomites are hardly the kind of company one would want to keep, and, as the saying goes, we are known by the company we keep. Judas's companions were so infamous that the God of the Hebrew Scriptures punished them severely. Let's examine the details. Esau was the elder son of Isaac and Rebekah, who sold his birthright to his younger brother Jacob for a mere mess of pottage. As Paul summarizes in Romans, I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau, or as Hebrews warns, see to it that no one becomes like Esau, an immoral and godless person, who sold his birthright for a single meal. Korah, meanwhile, was either Esau's son, or perhaps his grandson, depending on the genealogy. In any case, Korah is remembered for leading a revolt against Moses and Aaron, a story we will explore in more detail later. The Sodomites are infamous for the same reason their city's name lives on in the term sodomy. Sodom was a large city at the southern end of the Dead Sea, already notorious as a ruin in antiquity. I participated in an archaeological excavation of the probable site, Bab Edra, back in 1965. Though we found no incriminating evidence, Abraham's nephew, Lot, lived there and offered hospitality to 2 angelic visitors. But that night, the situation took a dark turn. Before they lay down, the men of the city, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we may know them." God's destruction of Sodom became widely known as a warning against committing abominations, deserving severe punishment. The Gospel of Matthew even references this warning, "For Sodom it shall be more bearable on that day than for that town." Sodom, along with its sister city Gomorrah, went down in history as the epitome of wickedness in the ancient world. Their legendary punishment is echoed by Isaiah, and as Isaiah predicted, if the Lord of hosts had not left survivors to us, we would have fared like Sodom and been made like Gomorrah. Their condemnation became even more explicit in the post-apostolic era. Likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the surrounding cities, which indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desires, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. in what is likely the last book of the New Testament to be written, as late as the 2nd century. Their depravity is described in even greater detail, for, if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment, and if by reducing the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to destruction, and made them an example of what is coming to the ungodly, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trial, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, especially those who indulge their flesh in depraved lust, and who despise authority. This is the Sodom that Irenaeus associates with Cain. 2 centuries later, Epiphanius also cites and refutes the Gnostic sect responsible for producing the Gospel of Judas, and others say, no, Judas betrayed him out of goodness, because of heavenly knowledge. For the evil archons knew that the weaker power would be drained if Christ were handed over to crucifixion. And when Judas discovered this, he was anxious, and did all he could to betray him, performing a good work for our salvation. We must therefore commend him and give him credit, since the salvation of the cross was achieved through him, along with the revelation that resulted from that event. According to Epiphanius, Judas did not betray the Savior from true understanding, as the Gnostics claimed, nor are the Jews rewarded for crucifying the Lord, even though salvation comes through the cross. Judas's act was not intended to bring about salvation, but rather stemmed from ignorance, envy, and greed, and therefore, they say, Judas discovered all about the higher powers. The Gnostics claimed him as one of their own, portraying him as particularly knowledgeable and even attributing a short work to him. The Gospel of Judas. Epiphanius emphasizes the familiar Gnostic dualism. This world is evil. The heavenly realm is good, and Judas may have viewed Christ's death in the flesh as necessary to release his divine nature. While Epiphanius condemns any notion of Judas acting out of knowledge or virtue, he acknowledges that some considered Judas knowledgeable, credited him with facilitating Christ's salvific act, and even attributed a gospel to him. What scholars already know about the Gospel of Judas. There exists a standard scholarly reference on the Gospels that were not included in the New Testament canon. It presents, in a very academic manner, yet with clarity and thoroughness, all that is currently known about the Cainites and their Gospel of Judas. Allow me to summarize this work, with due acknowledgement of its pedantic style. Attestation. The oldest and most important source is Irenaeus, who reports that certain Gnostic sects possessed, alongside other writings of their own, a gospel attributed to Judas, the traitor Judy of Angelium. These sects are elsewhere identified as the Cainites and are classified among the Gnostics by Epiphanius, along with the Nicolaitans, Aphites, Sethians, and Carpocratians. The existence and title of this document are also confirmed by Epiphanius' content. It would be premature to attribute to the Gospel of Judas a quotation preserved by Epiphanius from a Cainite work, such as his reference to angels who blinded Moses or hid the people around Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Even less certain is the attribution to this gospel of a formula cited by Irenaeus and Epiphanius, associated with the sexual ritual the sect practiced in pursuit of perfect gnosis. Dating. The Gospel of Judas must have been composed before 180 CE, as this is the first time Irenaeus mentions it in Against Heresies. If it truly originated from the Cainites, and if this sect, assuming it was an independent Gnostic group, was partially influenced, as some scholars suggest, by Marcion's teachings, then the text was unlikely to have been written before the mid-2nd century. However, these assumptions are speculative, so it is safest to estimate a composition date roughly between 130 and 170 CE. Very little concrete information exists about the Gospel of Judas itself, but we know more about the sect credited with producing it, the Cainites. Irenaeus categorized them as Gnostics, and Epiphanius associated them with the people around Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. While this is clearly a form of guilt by association, it provides insight into how the early church fathers viewed them. What had Dathan and Abiram done that was considered so egregious? The Hebrew scriptures recount their story in vivid detail. Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrances of their tents, together with their wives, children, and little ones. Moses said, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to perform all these works. It is not by my own will. If these people die a natural death, or if ordinary fate befalls them, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth to swallow them, along with everything they own, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord." As soon as Moses finished speaking, the ground beneath them split open. The earth swallowed them, along with their households and all their possessions. They went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them. Thus they perished from the midst of the assembly. The story is recounted again in a straightforward list of the Israelites who left Egypt with Moses, Numbers 26:9-11, the descendants of Eliab, Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. These are the same Dathan and Abiram who, along with Korah, were chosen from the congregation, but rebelled against Moses and Aaron. In their rebellion against the Lord, the earth opened and swallowed them, together with Korah, while fire consumed 250 men in their company, serving as a dire warning. Yet the sons of Korah survived. Even in Deuteronomy, when God's deeds for the chosen people are summarized, this event is highlighted. Deuteronomy 11:2, 6-7. Remember today that it is you who must recognize his greatness, his mighty hand and outstretched arm. Consider what he did to Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, son of Reuben. In the midst of all Israel, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, along with their households, their tents, and every living being with them. A psalm reflects on these events as well. Psalm 116, 16-18. Our ancestors in Egypt failed to recognize your marvelous works. They forgot the abundance of your steadfast love and rebelled against the Most High at the Red Sea. They were jealous of Moses in the camp and of Aaron, the Holy One of the Lord. The earth opened and swallowed Dathan, covering Abiram's faction, while fire consumed the wicked in their company. What made these individuals so terrible was their attempt to claim the priestly role of Aaron's family in the tabernacle. Terrible. Perhaps modern readers are shocked that God would allow 250 Israelites to go down alive into Sheol, along with their wives, children, and little ones. Could this also have unsettled earlier readers, making them question just how good and loving God truly was? Be careful, I may be nudging you toward a Gnostic perspective, even a Canaanite one. Back then, all one had to do was fully grasp the extreme wickedness of the world, so overwhelming that it seemed unreasonable to blame Adam and Eve alone. God must have created it this way, if not before Adam and Eve, then at least as harsh punishment afterward.